All right, I am here with your 2024 second class inductee to the Florida Wrestling Hall of Fame, Bret Gustafson. Bret, congratulations.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And what does it mean to be a part of the Florida Wrestling Hall of Fame?
It's huge. Honored, humbled. You know, the guys that went in last year were Olympic caliber. Solomon and I were talking before, and it's good to be first. It's good to be early, right? We've had so many stud wrestlers come through here with incredible accomplishments, but you know, we sort of helped lay that groundwork. So we're lucky, we're fortunate that we were able to sort of pave that path. Early days.
Very cool. Yeah, no doubt. So I want you to take us back in time to the beginning. When did you start wrestling? How old were you? What were your feelings about wrestling when you first began?
So I've got two older brothers, Tony and Todd. We're all 3 years apart. So Tony's 6 years older, and he started wrestling in middle school. There was like a class they were going to do during wrestling season. I don't remember if it was 8 weeks or 10 weeks. It's 2 days a week,
okay,
right? At Glenbard North High School in Illinois. And so I remember my mom saying, "Hey," to Todd and I, "Hey, do you guys want to take this wrestling? You know, do you want to do wrestling?" And I was super excited. I played a season of baseball. I played some football, but I thought I wasn't going to be able to wrestle until middle school. So I was really excited. And so Todd and I kind of started at the same time, but it wasn't really. It's not like the clubs we have now, right?
Right.
It was 2 days a week for a number of weeks. I don't remember how many weeks. And then at the end, they'd have like a tournament where they'd put everybody in a 4-man bracket. And so I remember the first year I went, I won my first match. So I was in the finals, right, against the coach's son. So in case I got smashed in the finals. And then the second year, I remember going in confident, like this is my year. And I lost the first one and I lost the second one. So I was, I started my career, my first 2 years with a record of 1-3. I think my dad put me in a tournament in Illinois afterwards, and I think I got terrorized again. So I was probably 1-5. And then we moved to Florida when I was in 5th grade. And I remember entering a tournament then, and I think I went 0-2 as well. I lost my first match. And my second match was a kid who'd been wrestling since like 3 or 4 years old. His name was Solomon Fleckman, and he's being inducted today with me. And so Solomon and I were acquaintances and friends through the years, but it's just very cool. You know, my kids wrestle now, and it's really cool to say, there's two guys that wrestled when they were, how old are you, in 5th grade, 10 years old or whatever, that are both D1 All-Americans and in the Hall of Fame. Like, which kids out there are wrestling each other on a Saturday that, they may end up doing the same thing?
Well, you obviously enjoyed it to keep coming back despite the bumps.
I thought I was good. I was terrible, but I somehow I must have thought that I was good. Looking back, I was horrendous,
So you've had a long career, an illustrious career. You wrestled at Brandon High School and went on to UTC. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Is there a single memorable moment during your wrestling career?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, but winning state as a junior, I remember that was a very special moment. I bumped up 2 or 3 weight classes, and I had the returning state champion at my weight, and I had the returning state runner-up in my weight, and I had to go through both of them. So I remember the weight class being really stacked. But I remember talking to Coach Cozart and saying, you know what? There's no way I would lose in the region. Like, I was going to be a region champ. So if one of these guys were in my region, they were going to get beat. So they're not really a state champ or a state runner-up, they're a region champ. And if they're in my region, they're going to get beat. So that's kind of how I looked at it.
Okay.
And ended up, I think they were both 6-point matches. So I ended up pulling away with both of them. And that was a super special moment winning my first state title. Very
cool. Yeah. Thinking back, is there anyone that you idealized? I mean, it could be an Olympic champion, it could be somebody in your room. Like, is there somebody you looked up to?
I had a poster, Todd and I had a poster of Dan Gable in our room, but it was different then, right? You're talking about, it's the 1980s, so we didn't have YouTube, right? We didn't have track or flow or any of this stuff.
Right.
So we didn't really get to watch a lot of wrestling. I mean, Olympics were every 4 years. Wrestling didn't get a lot of play anyway, so I didn't see saw no collegiate wrestling, saw almost no Olympic style wrestling. So you'd hear these names and you'd see them in the magazines, right? USA Wrestling Magazine. And so you'd see these names. What was kind of cool is as a 10th grader, I went to the Iowa Intensive Wrestling Camp. And I met, there were 4 Knight brothers, right? Danny Knight was around my age. Steve Knight was at Iowa. Mike Knight was our coach for the junior nationals when I was a senior. And I didn't know the 4th one. But yeah, Steve Knight, I remember he was a real good coach, and he kind of worked with us, and so I always rooted for him. And then we met the Kistler brothers and the Bannock brothers, basically everybody from Iowa, right? We were at Iowa Intensive Camp.
Sure.
So those were the college guys that I met, so those are the guys that I kind of idolized a little bit.
Very cool. If you were to look back and kind of reflect, is there a personal attribute that you like embodied that helped you be successful in wrestling?
Yeah, I think, I was fortunate to have a good technician as a high school coach. That was a big thing. But an attribute, I would say, super competitive nature. That's number one. I just did not like to lose at anything. I think I've passed that to my sons. And then I think breaking down film. I always liked breaking down film. There wasn't a lot of film to break down, right? The stuff that my dad would flip. But I would watch other wrestlers, VHS tape. Even in college, I would get tapes of other schools, high-end schools, whether it's Iowa State, Nebraska, whatever, and break down some of their better wrestlers and actually learn from watching them wrestle. So I think that was something that really did help. I picked up some pretty valuable things from breaking down film of other wrestlers.
Pretty cool. Is there a person who's had the greatest influence on your wrestling career?
For sure, Russ Cozart. Without question.
Yeah.
He was amazing. He had a way to communicate, a way to make it fun. And I was, he when he came to Brandon, he came my brother Tony's senior year, so I was in 6th grade, right? You could say I'd been wrestling for 3 years, but not really, right? Mm-hmm. I was still kind of a beginner, but he had a passion for technique. He would go to these camps and he'd take notes and he'd bring that technique back to us. So yeah, he had a huge influence. Can
you talk a little bit about the being a part of Brandon program and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we had such a tradition, right?
Yeah.
And then watching my brother Tony wrestle, and then watching my brother Todd wrestle. So that was 5 years of the program that I got to watch and sit on the sidelines. And we didn't have middle school wrestling in Florida, right? We had tournaments, but there was no middle school wrestling.
Right.
And so I couldn't wait to be part of the Brandon program. And by the way, it was a senior high school. So I didn't even get to go as a freshman, right? You had to wait till your 10th grade year.
Oh, right.
Looking back, it would have been great to wrestle at least as a freshman. But I couldn't wait to be part of that tradition, part of the streak, right?
Right.
And so I would go over from middle school. I'd go over and I'd go practice with the JV team, and that helped a lot. Wrestling guys were a little older, a little bigger, a little stronger, and just going through the JV practices for basically 2 years before I went to high school.
If you had an opportunity to do your career over again, is there anything you would change if you look back on it?
Well, I would say probably 2 things. Like in high school, both my losses in my career came the same day. Second day of state, my 10th grade year. And I think looking back, I could have won, but I didn't know I could win. I was like, what am I doing here? I'm a 10th grader. Do I really belong in the state semis, right? And I did actually belong in the state semis. And the guy that I lost to, I wrestled that summer and I beat pretty handily. But I was so nervous and didn't feel like, I didn't, there's a huge mental game to wrestling. And
right.
I think I just froze. And the same thing in the consolation semis. So that I would do that day over. And then my senior year of college, I lost to a very tough guy. Because I was probably looking ahead to the 4 versus 5 matchup, which was going to be next. And then once I lost that match, because my goal was to win the NCAAs, I was so emotionally crushed that I did not step up and finish the tournament like I should have. And again, I ended up losing to a guy who I wrestled the next year when I wasn't even wrestling. I just stepped into a tournament and beat him soundly. So there's no way that guy should have been on the mat with me, but it is what it is, and that there's no excuses in wrestling. So yeah, if granted, I would love to get those losses back, but
sure.
That's part of the lessons.
Absolutely. So the last question I have for you is, what would you like for people to remember about you as a wrestler, as a person, just in general?
I think that I'm positive, that I kept a positive attitude with me. I try to make it fun. You know, I always had a pretty smiley attitude, a pretty positive attitude, but that doesn't take anything away from the intensity and the competitive nature. You know, it's funny, I hear people say, oh yeah, you're so silly and this and that, and then I have other people say, man, you're intense, right? And so I would say that I'm a person that never made an excuse, right? And that looked at the positive side of things. And that's helped me, I think that's helped me my whole life, and I'd like to pass that on, you know, to the next generation.
Very cool. Well, Bret, I want to say congratulations on your induction into the Florida Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I want to wish you the best of luck in the future.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you. So, I have a ton of gratitude being up here. I'm completely humbled to be with this group. I want to thank God for all the blessings that I've had throughout this sport in my life. My coolest, closest friends are either wrestlers, wrestlers' brothers, or wrestlers' friends. And as an adult, the best friends that I've made since I've been an adult are wrestling parents that I've met through youth wrestling. There's something special about the sport. It's the same things that people have mentioned earlier tonight. There's just something special about wrestling. I'd like to thank the Hall of Fame board members for inducting me. Incredible class. Like I said, completely humbled. Next, I'd like to thank my 3 coaches I had in my life. Ralph Manning was a college coach. Ethan Reeve recruited me to UTC as my college coach. And my club and high school coach, Russ Kozart, who's here tonight. Thank you. In about 6th grade, Coach used to drive us to tournaments. It was, I can remember a tournament or two where Todd was in the passenger seat and I climbed in the back of his Corvette, like back where the window is, no seat. So try doing that today. Tony and Todd, my brothers, would have never gotten the sport without you guys. I learned a ton from you all, took something for both of your games. I really appreciate you guys being here tonight. It means a lot. So thank you, Tony and Todd. My parents both passed in the last couple of years, but would have never been here without my parents either. They spent countless hours on the road, going to tournaments. This is before the day of staggered starts, which, by the way, is the greatest invention ever. Started in the morning and we'd be there till sometimes super late at night. So anyway, I wanted to just give thanks to my parents as well. And you all. I want to appreciate everybody in this room, because I gotta tell you something. You people are not normal. You're really not. So if somebody came up and said, look man, here's the deal, I got a plan. I want you guys to sit in I-4 Orlando traffic for a couple hours, to come to this hotel and spend $75 a head to sit in an uncomfortable hotel seat for a couple hours while a bunch of guys with bad mangled ears tell stories about the glory days. Normally people would say, you know what, I gotta stay home and water my plants, I would love to go. But you all, everybody in here said, well, I'm not sure, that sounds too good. What's the catch? So thank you all, everybody that's coming here to support. I started wrestling in Illinois in 3rd grade. I was terrible. I think I was 1-6 when we came to Florida. And I was introduced to Florida wrestling. I went to a tournament, I'd already lost 1. My dad put his arm around me and said, Bret, I think this next match is gonna be your toughest match. I think I argued with him and said, I don't think so, da-da-da. And so I took a whooping from a guy who's being inducted tonight, Solomon Fleckman. So Solomon, thank you for introducing me to Florida wrestling. So the reason that that's interesting to me is because I now coach youth wrestling and I've got my boys involved, and I just wonder as we're going through these matches, are there going to be 2 possible one day, D1 All-Americans or Hall of Famers wrestling each other on a Saturday at these youth tournaments, and we just don't know it yet. I've seen it happen with Eric Phillips' son, Chris Debian. He and Zach Sherman, they wrestled as kids and then without an injury would have wrestled again in the NCAA. There's just something very cool about that. You don't know who they're going to be. Zane, it could be you and Van, right? It could be you and Joey. Case could be you and Brady or Parker or Luke. Any of your partners, you never know who's going to stick with it, who's going to work hard through the years.
And when I think back to my introduction, my rough introduction to Florida wrestling in Solomon, it's a great memory. Brandon and UTC, where I wrestled, were both a family of families. Very cool atmosphere. And we're trying to do that at this club. During COVID, my kids were wrestling at Brandon. During COVID, we started a club called Scorpions Wrestling. And it's really become a culture like that, a family of families. And we're sort of a child of Brandon, but that's the sort of atmosphere that we want to pass on to our kids. I never got respect. None of us got respect at the national level being from Florida. But in 1987, we had a team we called Air Florida. We had some kids that could really throw. And 3 of us made the Greco final. Solomon was one of them, Greg Rivera was another, and myself. All of the other wrestlers somebody had a great idea. They'd seen a movie one too many times, and they said, toga, toga, toga. They took all the bed sheets from the dorms. I don't know what they were wearing underneath them, but they wore togas to what is now Fargo, to the national finals, with a big sign that said Air Florida. And we placed 4th in Florida that year, and Ohio placed 5th. And I love that, to see that Florida was on the rise. Years later, I was fortunate enough to make the podium as a junior in 1991. Wimberley was the first. I was the 4th, and I had great pride in that. Now, even though my most disappointing moment of wrestling was my senior year, I wanted to win it and be the first NCAA champion for Florida. And as I sat there and watched the finals, I was depressed because I knew I could go with the 2 guys that were in the finals. But there was one glimmer of hope, and one thing that I loved was when I looked down and I saw Steve Williams, Solomon Fleckman, Mike Schick, and Guy Harris, all 4 from Florida, all 4 made the podium. We went from 3 in history to 4 in 91 to 8 in 92. Florida was definitely on the rise. Just gonna see if I missed anybody here. So, the last thing I'd like to say is I'd just like to thank Zane, Case, thank you for bringing me back into the sport. This thing is a special fraternity, man. Wrestling, I was with my friend Steve, and we were in a bar in Madrid, and we met wrestlers. I was in my 30s. They invited me to come work out with the Spanish national team, and I took it, went and wrestled with them the next day. Same thing happened to me in Cuba one time. The guy was working a bouncing door, was a Cuban wrestler. I overslept for that one, didn't make that one. But there is this fraternity when you meet a wrestler, right? And it's just awesome. So boys, thanks for getting me back involved. And Tammy, you're the key to this whole thing. The 4 kids, we're running a million miles an hour. I'm traveling around the country. You're keeping everything at home. I love you, and I appreciate everything that you do.